because I worked with so many young artists, and we were all kids moving so fast, and we all wanted to succeed so bad. And it wasn't until I was 40 years old doing some intense therapy that I realized I was so driven by the fear that I wouldn't be enough.
You sold your company for $1.1 billion, which I don't think people realize. It's a fucking lot of money. At 39 years old, roughly?
Yeah, I was about to turn 40.
You talk about laying on the beach with your belly out.
Yeah.
I mean, with a significant amount of money in your bank account without the same...
No cap. By the time this video wraps up, the way you see the music industry might flip completely, because what Scooter Braun built was not just some regular artist management company. Nah, it was something way bigger. It was a machine, a system built to spot young talent early, pull them into contracts fast, and squeeze the maximum value out of their careers while they were still young, hungry, and not fully aware of what those papers really meant. And the craziest part? Most of it was completely legal. Yeah, everything was written into contracts and signed on the dotted line.
This guy made over $600 million off YouTube, but he doesn't make videos. His name's Scooter Braun. Rewind to 2002. Scooter's trying to break into the music business. Just one problem. He's got zero connections. So he starts throwing parties, big ones. Pretty soon, the music heavyweights are taking notice. Scooter lands a job at a record label and learns how the industry works. Fast forward to 2007, our boy starts his own firm, and then he spots a kid making music on YouTube. His name is Justin Bieber. Scooter takes Bieber on as a client and locks in a record deal. Then he goes full throttle on YouTube, setting up gigs wherever he can, then posting them all back to YouTube. It sounds obvious today, but we're in 2007. Before long, Bieber's a superstar, but Scooter's not done. He signs Ariana Grande, Demi Lovato, and so many more. By 2021, he's at the top of his game. Then he sells his whole company for over $1 billion, and Scooter's share over $600 million.
Let's break this down. Scooter Braun wasn't just another music manager during his peak years. He was running one of the most powerful entertainment companies in the world. His company, Ithaca Holdings, backed by the financial giant Goldman Sachs, was valued at over $1 billion. And the artist roster? It looked like the Grammy nominations list every single year. But here's the part people in the industry kept whispering about. Behind the sold-out arenas, platinum records, and billion-dollar headlines, there was a pattern people started noticing. Critics, former clients, and insiders kept pointing to the same setup again and again. Young artists, long contracts, tight control over touring, branding, and ownership. Management taking percentages straight from the gross revenue, not the net. And once those artists got older, started asking tougher questions, and wanted more control over their own careers, the partnership suddenly came to an end, again and again. That $500 million fortune didn't appear out of nowhere. And when Scooter Braun sat down for an interview in 2024 and openly admitted he carried guilt about how quickly he pushed young artists early in their careers, that moment caught attention. That sounded like a man who built a massive empire and is now looking back at how it all came together. But to really understand how this story unfolded, we have to rewind the tape, back to the beginning, back to Atlanta. Back to a college dropout with no artist roster, no label backing, and nothing but a phone in his hand and bold confidence pushing him forward. Let's roll the clock back to the early 2000s. Atlanta, Georgia, the heart of hip-hop culture at that moment. Lil Jon was dominating the crunk era. Ludacris was everywhere on the radio. Jermaine Dupri and So Def were shaping the sound of the industry. And somehow, right in the middle of all that energy, there was a young guy named Scott Samuel Braun, a Jewish kid from Greenwich, Connecticut, who didn't exactly look like he belonged in those rooms, yet somehow kept showing up in them. Scooter, the nickname came early, and it stuck for a reason, because that's exactly how he moved, sliding into opportunities before people even noticed he was there. Born in 1981, he grew up in a family with deep history. His father had fled Hungary as a refugee, and his grandparents survived the Holocaust. That past carried weight in their household, and those stories were felt every single day. Every night before bed, his father would tell him and his brother the same thing. You're different, you're special, I hold you to a higher standard. No excuses, no days off, no shortcuts. That message stuck deep. That pressure, that constant feeling that he had to prove himself worthy of the life he was given, became the engine behind everything Scooter Braun would later chase. When he got to Emory University in Atlanta, things started moving fast. While most students were focused on classes, Scooter accidentally stumbled into something that would change his entire path: party promotion. One day, he walked into a nightclub, looked around, and straight up asked the owner how much they'd pay him if he brought a crowd the next week. Simple question, huge consequences. Soon, he was running Thursday night college parties that were packed wall to wall, and every dollar he made, he poured it right back into learning the game. On Tuesday nights, he showed up at the Velvet Room, a club run by promoter Alex Delwin. That place became his real classroom.
Alex showed him how the real money flowed in nightlife, how much the door was worth, what percentage of the bar a promoter should negotiate, how to build a crowd from absolutely nothing. Scooter wasn't just partying there, he was studying every move. And those Tuesday nights opened doors, because that's where he started meeting real industry figures, rappers, singers, managers, label executives. But he didn't chase them down begging for attention. His strategy was different. Let the work speak first. If the work was strong enough, the right people would come to him. That mindset paid off fast. Word about his events reached Jermaine Dupri, and instead of Scooter chasing the opportunity, Jermaine Dupri reached out to him. Suddenly, Scooter was inside So Def Records. Entry-level job, sure, but that didn't matter at all. He was just 19 years old and sitting inside one of the most important labels in hip-hop, and he watched everything. How deals were structured, how artists were developed, how money moved through the business, from touring to merchandise, from publishing to master recordings. Scooter wasn't just working there, he was studying the whole machine from the inside. Every detail, every conversation, every contract, he was mentally storing it all. Then, something wild happened. By the age of 20, Scooter Braun became the youngest vice president in So Def history. Think about that for a second. 20 years old, VP at the same label that helped shape an entire era of Atlanta hip-hop. But while his career was taking off, his grades at Emory were crashing hard. His GPA dropped from somewhere in the 3s to barely above a 1. The dean called him in for a serious meeting. A dean sat across from him and gave him a warning. Focus on school or risk throwing away his future. The dean told him the chances of making it in the music industry without an Emory degree were 1 in a billion. That moment flipped a switch. Scooter walked away from school completely. Not long after that, he started SB Projects at just 24 years old. A small management company at first, but it would eventually grow into a roster that made him one of the most powerful figures in the music business. His first artist signing was Asher Roth, a rapper from Pennsylvania who could move comfortably in hip-hop while still connecting with college audiences. Scooter had a clear idea in mind: find an artist who could speak to college culture the way Eminem once spoke to suburban listeners. Asher fit that lane perfectly. But the second artist Scooter discovered, that changed the entire story. It's 2008. Scooter is sitting at his computer when someone sends him a YouTube link. On the screen is a 12-year-old kid from Stratford, Ontario, Canada. His mom had been uploading simple videos of him singing R&B covers inside their house. No production team, no label backing, no industry connections. Just a young kid holding a guitar, a natural voice that grabbed your attention instantly, and a kind of charisma that jumped straight through the screen. For real. The moment Scooter watched that video, something clicked instantly. Later on, he even said that from the second he saw that kid performing, he knew he had found exactly what he'd been searching for. But here's the part most people never heard about. Scooter didn't just send a quick message or reach out through social media like people do now. Nope, he went full detective mode. He studied the background of the video and noticed a church behind the kid while he was singing. So what did he do? He started digging. He searched online, called school boards across Canada, and followed every tiny clue he could find just to track down the family. Within 24 hours, he located Patty Millette, Justin Bieber's mom, and he cold called her out of nowhere. Just imagine that moment. A 25-year-old stranger from Atlanta calling a single mother in Canada and saying her 12-year-old son could become the biggest pop star in the world. Most parents would hang up immediately, but Patty didn't. Instead, she stayed on the phone with Scooter for more than an hour that very first night. Things moved fast after that. Scooter flew the family down to Atlanta, set up a meeting with Usher, and suddenly, everything changed. Just like that, a 25-year-old party promoter with only one artist on his roster became the co-manager of what would soon become the most famous teenager on the planet. But from a business perspective, this kind of situation is huge, because when someone signs a 12-year-old artist, they're not just helping manage a career, they're helping guide nearly every financial decision that young performer will face for years. That means being in the room when the record deal gets negotiated, helping decide which endorsements make sense and which ones to walk away from, planning touring schedules, managing branding, setting the pace of the entire career. And on top of that, management usually receives a percentage, often somewhere around 15 to 20%, taken from the gross revenue. That means the cut comes from the total money coming in before expenses are even deducted. By 2012, Justin Bieber was only 17 years old and already one of the most recognized people on the planet. His song Baby crossed 1 billion views on YouTube, something that had literally never happened before at that time. Tours were selling out arenas all across the world. Merchandise was flying off the shelves at levels usually seen from veteran superstars. Brand deals kept stacking up. Before Bieber even turned 18, he had already released multiple platinum albums, headlined global tours, and built a massive entertainment brand worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And through all of it, Scooter Braun's management company was still collecting its percentage from the gross revenue. Concert tickets, endorsement deals, merchandise sales, every stream of income flowing through the machine. But eventually, things started getting more complicated. By the time Bieber reached his early 20s, cracks were beginning to show publicly. He spoke openly about struggling with pressure, identity, faith, and mental health challenges. In 2017, he canceled the Purpose World Tour before it finished, explaining that he was exhausted and needed time to focus on his well-being. Inside industry circles, a quiet conversation started spreading. Some people wondered if the pace of fame had been too intense, too early, for too long. There were no criminal accusations, no lawsuits, and no public attacks between them. But years later, Scooter Braun reflected on that period himself. In a 2024 interview, he said, "I feel a lot of guilt because I worked with so many young artists, and we were all kids moving so fast, and we all wanted to succeed so bad." He also said that if he could go back and do things differently, he would have brought therapists on tour for the artists and slowed the pace down much more. He openly admitted that at the time, he didn't really know how to slow down and look inward. None of them did. That kind of statement doesn't sound like someone saying everything was handled perfectly. It sounds more like a quiet confession, wrapped in careful words, and the actions that followed spoke even louder. Over time, Justin Bieber began distancing himself from Scooter's management circle. Eventually, he sold his music catalog for a reported $200 million. To the public, it looked like a massive payday, but many people inside the industry read it differently. Some saw it as financial restructuring rather than pure celebration. Bieber started stepping back from the non-stop machine. He focused on rebuilding his life on his own terms and moving at a different pace. Then in 2023, Scooter Braun officially stepped away from artist management altogether. By that time, the relationship between him and Bieber was described by many observers as different. Not a loud breakup, not a public fight, just a slow separation. A quiet exit from a partnership that started with a random cold call years earlier and ended after both men had built enormous wealth together. But some people believe that level of success may have also come with personal costs along the way. Then came a moment that shook the entire music industry. On June 30th, 2019, headlines exploded across the internet. Scooter Braun's company, Ithaca Holdings, had officially acquired Big Machine Label Group, the Nashville record label founded by Scott Borchetta. The reported price tag, around $300 million. At first glance, it looked like a routine corporate move. Media companies buy record labels all the time in the entertainment business. But this deal included something that made it anything but routine. Big Machine Label Group owned the master recordings for Taylor Swift's first 6 studio albums. That includes Taylor Swift, Fearless, Speak Now, Red, 1989, and Reputation. Those albums represented about 15 years of her life and career. the recordings that transformed the teenage country singer from Pennsylvania into one of the biggest global artists in modern music. And suddenly, those master recordings, the original audio files that generate royalties every time the music is played, now belong to Scooter Braun's company. To understand why this situation hit so hard, you have to understand what master recordings really mean in the music business. A master recording is the official, original recording of a song. Whoever owns that master gets paid every time that specific recording is used. Every Spotify stream, every movie soundtrack placement, every TV appearance, every commercial license, every time a track gets sampled in another song. Masters are considered one of the most valuable assets in the entire music industry because they keep generating revenue for decades. Even if an artist stops touring, even if they stop releasing music, those master recordings continue earning money for whoever owns them. And Taylor Swift's catalog was not just valuable, it was massive. 15 years of some of the most successful pop recordings ever released, a financial asset estimated to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And now, those recordings were owned by someone she had publicly clashed with before. Taylor Swift did not stay silent about it. Within hours of the announcement, she posted a statement on Tumblr that spread across the internet at lightning speed. She described the situation as her worst-case scenario. She said she had spent years trying to negotiate ownership of her own master recordings, but was never given a real opportunity to purchase them. According to her statement, Scott Borchetta structured the deal in a way where she only learned about the sale through the news, without warning and without a chance to make her own offer. And then she used a word that instantly ignited the internet. She called Scooter Braun a bully. That single word set off debates that lasted for years. Because from a strict legal standpoint, Scooter Braun had not broken any laws. His company purchased Big Machine through a standard business acquisition. The original contract Taylor Swift signed with the label back in 2005, when she was still a teenage artist just starting her career, gave Big Machine ownership of the master recordings. At the time, that was very common in the music industry, especially for new artists who had little leverage and limited legal power when negotiating their first record deals. That contract Taylor Swift signed with Big Machine dates all the way back to when she was just 15 years old. At that age, she was still legally a minor, and the terms inside that agreement, the same terms she reportedly tried to renegotiate for years, meant that the master recordings of her music legally belonged to the label, not to her. So when Scooter Braun entered the picture years later, he knew exactly what he was buying. He also knew there was already tension in the background. There had been public friction between Taylor Swift and several people connected to his circle, especially the highly publicized conflict between Taylor Swift and Kanye West. Scooter had been close to that situation. Back in 2016, he even reposted Kanye West's Instagram video that mocked Taylor. Taylor later referenced that moment directly in her Tumblr statement after the Big Machine acquisition. So there was already a documented history of public tension before the deal even happened. And despite that, Scooter's company still went forward with purchasing the label. But what happened after the sale is where the story becomes even more complicated. According to Taylor Swift's public statements, Scooter Braun's team did offer her an opportunity to purchase her master recordings. However, she said the offer included a non-disclosure agreement that would have permanently prevented her from speaking publicly about the entire situation. Taylor said she refused those terms. Scooter's side later responded that the offer had been genuine and that she chose not to move forward. Taylor maintained that the conditions attached to the deal would have forced her into silence. And the truth is, the public will probably never know every detail of what was said behind those closed doors. But what happened next changed the music business forever. Taylor Swift announced she would re-record every single one of her first 6 albums from scratch. Brand new recordings, new studio sessions, fresh releases that she would fully own herself, and she built an entire marketing movement around it. The plan was simple but powerful. Encourage her fans, one of the most organized and loyal fan communities in entertainment, to stream and support the new recordings instead of the original masters she didn't own. That's where the phrase Taylor's version was born. Fearless, Taylor's version. Red, Taylor's version. Speak Now, Taylor's version. 1989, Taylor's version.
Each release turned into a massive cultural event. Millions of fans intentionally shifted their listening to the new versions. Streaming numbers exploded. Media coverage followed each release. Streaming platforms began highlighting the new recordings. Radio stations started playing them. Film and television licensing deals increasingly moved towards the versions Taylor controlled. The strategy worked because the audience believed in it. Fans actively promoted the version she owned, while the original recording slowly lost cultural momentum. For Scooter Braun, this created a serious financial problem, because the value of master recordings depends heavily on which version the market chooses to use. If listeners, radio, film studios, and streaming platforms start favoring a different version, the financial value of the original recordings can slowly weaken. In many ways, the re-recording campaign worked like a strategic takeover of her own catalog. Even though she didn't legally own the original masters, she still had something powerful: the trust and loyalty of her audience, and that influence changed the economics of the situation. Eventually, Scooter Braun sold the master recordings to a private investment firm called Shamrock Holdings for a reported $300 million. Now here's where the numbers get interesting. Scooter's company originally purchased the entire Big Machine label group for about $300 million. Then, the Taylor Swift catalog, widely believed to be the most valuable asset in that deal, was sold alone for roughly the same amount. Do the math for a second. If Shamrock paid around $300 million just for the masters, and Scooter paid about $300 million for the entire label, that means every other asset connected to Big Machine, other artist catalogs, publishing rights, label infrastructure, effectively stayed with him after the sale. In simple terms, the Taylor Swift catalog may have covered the cost of the whole acquisition, and depending on how the numbers moved between purchase and sale, it's possible the asset even increased in value during that time.
But financially smart deals don't always erase public controversy, because the Taylor Swift situation became the defining storyline attached to Scooter Braun's career. From that moment forward, every business move he made started being viewed through that lens. And then, people began noticing something else. Taylor Swift was not the only major artist who eventually stepped away from Scooter Braun's management circle. One by one, some of the biggest names connected to him started moving in different directions. Let's start with Ariana Grande. For years, they had a powerful management partnership. During that time, Ariana released albums like Dangerous Woman, Sweetener, Thank You Next, and Positions, an incredible run that helped turn her into one of the most recognizable pop stars on the planet. During Ariana Grande's peak years, the numbers were enormous. Billion-stream records, sold-out world tours, a brand that stretched far beyond music into fragrance, fashion, and huge corporate partnerships. And throughout that entire era, Scooter Braun was managing the operation and collecting his management percentage across those different revenue streams. Just look at the scale of it. The Sweetener World Tour alone reportedly grossed more than $146 million. Her album Thank You Next moved around 360,000 units in its first week, making it one of the fastest-selling releases by a female artist since Beyoncé's Lemonade. And the business outside of music was just as massive. Her REM beauty and fragrance line reportedly crossed $100 million in its first year. That's not just a music career anymore. That's a full lifestyle brand with global reach. At that level, Ariana Grande wasn't simply releasing songs. She was operating an entertainment empire that stretched across multiple industries. And Scooter Braun's company was managing the machine behind it. Every deal negotiated through that system created a commission. Every brand partnership, every tour, every product line, every campaign flowing through that infrastructure generated management revenue. This wasn't just a percentage of concert tickets anymore. It was a percentage of an entire global brand. Then, sometime around 2022 into 2023, Ariana Grande stepped away. No dramatic announcement, no public feud, no long social media posts explaining the details. Just a quiet separation handled mostly behind legal doors. In the music industry, there's actually a phrase for that type of situation: a soft exit.
And soft exits from major long-term management relationships usually happen when both sides decide it's cleaner to move forward privately rather than fight publicly. We may never know the exact reasons, but what people do know is that Ariana Grande's management structure today looks very different from the one she had during the Scooter Braun era. The split appeared calm, quiet, and final. And when the artist who helped elevate your reputation from Justin Bieber's manager to one of the most powerful managers in music decides to step away at the height of her success, people in the industry notice, because moments like that raise questions. Then there was Kanye West. His management relationship with Scooter Braun was brief, and it ended quickly. Kanye has spent years openly criticizing parts of the music industry. He's talked repeatedly about artist ownership, contract structures, and the way some corporate systems treat musicians like financial assets. He even changed his legal name to Ye and made several controversial public moves that challenged corporate relationships around him. This is not someone known for staying quiet when he disagrees with something. Yet when his management relationship with Scooter Braun ended, there were no direct diss tracks about him. No lawsuits, no long public confrontation focused on that situation. Just finished. And when an artist who has publicly challenged major companies, fashion brands, and even other celebrities chooses to quietly exit a management partnership without turning it into a media battle, that tells industry observers something. It suggests that moving on quickly may have been the best path forward, but the pattern didn't stop there. Demi Lovato, J Balvin, Carly Rae Jepsen, Dan and Shay, Martin Garrix, Tori Kelly.
One by one, artists who had worked under the SB Projects umbrella during important phases of their careers eventually moved in new directions. Some transitions were smooth and quiet, while others involved more visible tension. Gradually, the massive roster that once looked like a global list of music superstars began thinning out as Scooter Braun stepped back from day-to-day artist management. That process eventually led to his announcement in 2023 that he was retiring from the management side of the business. And here's something important about how that roster had originally been built. Scooter wasn't just signing random artists. He often focused on a very specific type of talent: young performers, newly discovered artists with huge raw ability and major market potential. Many of them were still early in their careers, before they had years of industry experience or large legal teams negotiating every contract detail. He found them early, signed them when the opportunity felt exciting and life-changing, and then helped build those careers into global brands, while the original agreements from those early days remained part of the business structure. For years, critics inside the industry had pointed to that pattern, and over time, as more stories surfaced and more artists eventually moved on, those observations became harder for people to ignore, because Scooter Braun's system clearly worked. It created massive success stories and enormous financial outcomes. But many observers believe the model worked best when artists were young, highly motivated, and still learning how the long-term business side of the music industry really operates. Long contracts, management percentages taken directly from gross revenue, and major influence over touring schedules, branding choices, and business partnerships all flowed through Scooter Braun's management system, and every level of that system had a percentage attached. As the artists grew older, something started to change. Their legal teams got stronger, their financial advisors became more experienced, and the artists themselves began learning how the business actually worked. They started asking deeper questions. Who owns the masters? Who signs the endorsement deals? Where exactly is the revenue flowing? And whose name is on which contract? That's usually the moment when pressure begins to build inside these kinds of relationships, because a deal that feels generous when you're 17 years old can look very different when you're 25 and selling out stadiums across the world. At that point, the artist's leverage has exploded, their fame is massive, and their brand is global. But the management contract often stays exactly the same as it was when they first signed it. Eventually, that imbalance becomes hard to ignore. And here's where the story flips direction a little, because people who support Scooter Braun, and there are many, will point out something important that sometimes gets lost in the outrage narratives. He took risks on artists when almost nobody else believed in him. He called a single mom in Canada about a random YouTube video at a time when the music industry wasn't even sure if YouTube mattered yet.
He traveled to Sweden to meet a small startup called Spotify before most American executives took streaming seriously, and he reportedly held on to those early Spotify shares for nearly 18 years without selling them. While others were still mourning the collapse of CD sales, he was already betting on the digital future of music. He also helped build careers that generated enormous wealth for the artists themselves, including Justin Bieber, whose reported net worth is around $300 million.
Ariana Grande's fortune is estimated somewhere above $200 million, and Taylor Swift recently completed the highest grossing concert tour in recorded history, bringing in more than $1 billion in revenue. These are not artists who ended up financially ruined, but financial success and ethical debate are two very different conversations, and that's exactly why this story keeps getting discussed. Because it is possible for both things to exist at the same time. An artist can become extremely wealthy through a system while still feeling that parts of that system weren't built fully in their favor. Someone can build a $300 million net worth and still look back at contracts signed early in their career that gave away ownership of key creative work. Both realities can exist side by side, and that tension between what artists gained and what they might have kept is the conversation the Taylor Swift situation pushed into the spotlight. For the first time, the industry had to talk about it loudly and publicly. Now let's break down the numbers behind Scooter Braun's fortune, because when people hear a $500 million net worth, they sometimes imagine something mysterious, but the math is actually pretty straightforward. Revenue stream number 1. Management commissions. In the music industry, management usually receives about 15 to 20% of an artist's gross revenue, and that word gross matters a lot. Net revenue is what remains after expenses, things like tour production costs, venue rentals, travel crews, marketing, stage design, and promotion, while gross revenue is the total money generated before any of those costs are removed. And management commissions are often calculated from the gross. Now look at Justin Bieber's career alone. Across more than a decade of global success, conservative estimates suggest Bieber generated over $500 million in gross revenue through touring, merchandise, endorsements, and streaming. The Believe Tour in 2012 and 2013 grossed more than $195 million, and the Dangerous Woman Tour before that pulled in around $70 million. Then add brand deals, fragrance lines, and streaming revenues stacking up year after year. Now bring in J Balvin, one of the most streamed Latin artists in the world, with massive global tours across North America, Europe, and Latin America, generating huge ticket sales. Then add Martin Garrix. At his peak, he was ranked the #1 DJ in the world by DJ Mag, with festival appearance fees reportedly reaching $1 million or more for a single performance. Add Demi Lovato, add Tori Kelly, add Dan and Shay, whose country crossover hits dominated radio and packed arenas across the United States. Now zoom out and look at the full SB Projects roster over more than 2 decades of management. When analysts estimate the numbers conservatively, Scooter Braun's total management commission earnings across his career likely falls somewhere between $150 million and $200 million. And that's only the first layer of the financial machine. Revenue stream number 2, company equity and the Ithaca Holdings sale. SB Projects eventually expanded into something much larger, Ithaca Holdings. This was no longer just a management company. It became a full-scale entertainment investment platform. When Goldman Sachs, one of the most selective investment banks on the planet, decided to invest in the company, that decision carried serious weight. Banks like Goldman Sachs don't move based on hype. They analyze data, study revenue streams, review contracts, evaluate catalog values, touring income projections, and brand partnerships. After examining the numbers, they concluded that Ithaca Holdings had the potential to become a billion-dollar enterprise, and eventually it did. When Ithaca Holdings was sold, the publicly confirmed transaction value landed at about $1.1 billion. Scooter Braun's exact personal payout from that deal has never been fully disclosed publicly, but when a company sells for more than $1 billion and you are the founder who built the roster, built the relationships, and built the infrastructure, the financial outcome usually changes your life permanently. Now we get to revenue stream number 3, the Big Machine Label Group acquisition. This is where the financial strategy starts looking almost like chess.
Ithaca Holdings purchased Big Machine Label Group for a reported $300 million, and inside that purchase was an enormous bundle of assets. Taylor Swift's first 6 albums, plus the recorded catalogs of other major artists connected to the label. That roster included names like Tim McGraw, Rascal Flatts, Florida Georgia Line, Thomas Rhett, and several others. There were also publishing rights, production systems, and ongoing artist contracts generating revenue. Then came the major twist. When Shamrock Holdings later purchased what was widely reported to be the Taylor Swift catalog for around $300 million, that single asset potentially covered the cost of the entire Big Machine acquisition. Think about that for a second. If one asset from the deal recovered the full purchase price, then everything else connected to Big Machine, including the remaining catalogs, publishing rights, label systems, and artist relationships, effectively remained in the portfolio. That kind of financial structure is not an accident. In the world of entertainment acquisitions, deals like that are considered extremely successful. Revenue stream number 4, early stage investments. And this is where things get even more interesting. In the early 2000s, Scooter Braun reportedly started cold calling people listed on Billboard's 30 Under 30 lists just to introduce himself and build connections. One of those calls reached Daniel Ek, a Swedish entrepreneur working on a tiny music streaming platform that barely existed outside Scandinavia. That company was called Spotify. Scooter flew to Sweden to meet him because he wanted to invest immediately. At first, he wasn't allowed in, but he kept building relationships and eventually secured an early equity position in the company. Spotify eventually went public in 2018 with a valuation of about $26 billion, and by 2024, the company's market value had climbed above $60 billion. Scooter Braun has said publicly that he has never sold a single share from his early investment. Holding equity through a company's entire growth cycle, from startup stage to global dominance, can become one of the most powerful wealth-building moves an investor can make. And Spotify is only one example. Across his career, Scooter Braun has invested in multiple technology companies, media startups, and entertainment ventures that the public rarely hears about. That's what long-term wealth building at the executive level often looks like. Not just one lucky moment, but multiple investments growing at the same time. When you step back and look at the full picture, 4 major financial engines were running simultaneously.
Management commissions creating constant cash flow, company equity creating massive enterprise value, catalog ownership generating long-term assets, and early-stage investments compounding over decades. All of those systems feeding into each other, and all of them growing at the same time. That's how a college dropout party promoter from Atlanta eventually built a fortune estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars. Whether people view Scooter Braun as a brilliant strategist, a controversial figure in the music business, or a mix of both, one thing is undeniable. His story forced the music industry to ask bigger questions about contracts, ownership, and power in the modern entertainment world. And that conversation is still unfolding today. If you made it this far in the video, drop a comment below and share what you think about the whole situation. Do you think Scooter Braun was simply playing the game the way the industry has always worked? Or do you think the system itself needs to change? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves music industry stories. Your support helps the channel grow, and there are a lot more wild industry stories coming next.